You own what? That was the stunned reaction echoing through the marble floors of Haven National Bank when an elderly black man in worn boots and a canvas sack stepped through the doors and softly said, "I'm here to check on my building." Laughter erupted from behind the counter. The tellers and managers thought it was a joke, some sort of confusion. How could this old man, dressed like he just stepped off a dusty road, claim ownership of their bank? But within the next 20 minutes, their laughter would vanish and be replaced by silence, disbelief, and shame. It was just another ordinary Thursday morning in downtown Atlanta. The hum of printers, the clatter of heels on polished tile, and the occasional beeping of digital counters gave the bank lobby its usual mechanical rhythm. Sunlight poured through the glass walls, reflecting off marble floors and casting warm stripes across the navy blue chairs where customers waited, heads buried in their phones or paperwork. Bank employees moved in a practiced rhythm. Tellers processed transactions with half smiles, customer service reps buzzed between desks, and managers peered at spreadsheets through designer glasses. It was business as usual. That is, until the doors parted and he walked in. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a place like Haven National Bank. Not by their standards, anyway. The man was in his late 70s, maybe early 80s, his posture slightly bent, but his presence oddly commanding. He wore a faded brown overcoat, neatly buttoned despite the spring warmth, and a flat tweed cap pulled low over a weathered face. His skin bore the rich depth of someone who had lived many seasons under the sun, and his eyes, though aged, burned with quiet purpose. What drew even more attention, though, was the sack, slung over his right shoulder. It was the kind of cloth bag farmers used to carry seed, old tools, or harvests. Frayed at the seams, patched in places, and stained from years of use, the bag looked wildly out of place against the bank's sleek, modern decor. He stepped up to the front desk, without hesitation. The young woman seated there, early 20s, perfectly groomed, name tag reading Kelsey, looked up, clearly unsure what to expect. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" she asked in her well-rehearsed, chipper tone. "I'm here to speak with the manager," the man replied, his voice calm and low, like the creak of an old porch swing. "I believe I own this bank." The words floated in the air for a second, almost too casually delivered to match their meaning. Kelsey blinked, tilted her head slightly, then smiled awkwardly. "You mean you have an account here?" The man's face didn't change. "No," he said, as steady as before. "I mean the building, the land, the original charter. I built this place from the ground up." Her fingers froze mid-keystroke. Behind her, two co-workers exchanged raised eyebrows. A muffled laugh escaped one of them. Kelsey gave a polite, strained chuckle. "I see. 1 moment, please. I'll get the manager." As she turned to fetch help, whispers began to circulate among the staff. Some chuckled. Others shook their heads. An elderly man with a dusty bag, claiming he owned a modern financial institution? It had to be a mix-up, a prank, maybe even a scam. But the man didn't flinch. He stood silently, eyes scanning the bank, like he was looking at something more than walls and desks, like he was seeing memories, blueprints, history. And that's when everything began to change. Within minutes of the front desk call, the assistant manager emerged from a back office, adjusting his tie and wearing the kind of cautious smile reserved for eccentric customers. Flanking him was a broad-shouldered security guard, arms folded tight across his chest, eyes scanning the older man up and down like he was assessing a threat or a nuisance. The assistant manager stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Sir, I understand you believe you own the bank?" The elderly man, still standing with quiet dignity beside the receptionist's desk, gave a single nod. "That's right." The manager let out a chuckle, not mocking, but clearly unsure. "Well, that's quite a claim. May I ask your name?" "Robert Lee Johnson," the man replied, his voice like smooth gravel. "And I'm not here to make trouble. I'm just here to confirm what's mine." With a calm that made even the security guard shift uncomfortably, Robert set his sack gently on the ground. Then, with deliberate care, he unfastened the top and reached inside. One by one, he began pulling out papers, old, worn, some in plastic sleeves, Others folded carefully like treasures. The documents had the yellowish tint of age, their edges curled and ink slightly faded. First came a stack of faded property deeds, marked with city stamps from decades past. Then came tax records, all signed and paid in full. Next, a brittle newspaper clipping from the late 1960s with the headline, "Local Black Entrepreneur Buys Prime Corner Lot for Commercial Use." The grainy photo showed a much younger Robert in front of a vacant lot, exactly where Haven National Bank stood today. Still, the onlookers weren't convinced. One young teller leaned toward a coworker and whispered, "This guy's playing us. Total scam artist." Another murmured, barely suppressing a laugh, "Are we being punked right now? Where's the camera crew?" But Robert didn't acknowledge them. He simply continued his quiet work, as though he'd done this 100 times before, proved himself, over and over, to people who assumed he didn't belong. Finally, he unfolded the document that made the entire room pause. It was a notarized title deed. The paper crackled faintly as he opened it flat across the counter. In bold letters, it declared Robert Lee Johnson as the primary shareholder and original landowner of the commercial plot at 12th and Peachtree, the precise coordinates of Haven National Bank. The seal of Fulton County was pressed in the lower corner. The signature of a senior real estate official, dated 5 years ago, sat clearly on the last line. Signed, sealed, legal. The room went still. The assistant manager leaned in, squinting, no longer smiling. He looked at the document, then back at Robert, then back again. "This can't be right." The security guard shifted his stance, suddenly unsure of his role. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered. Even the clicking of keyboards in the background had stopped. For the first time that morning, the staff of Haven National Bank realized something unsettling and powerful. Robert Lee Johnson might not have looked like a typical bank owner, but the paper didn't lie. He wasn't confused. He wasn't scamming. He was home. The atmosphere in the bank grew increasingly tense as the legal liaison, now seated at a side desk, pored over Robert's documents with a growing look of disbelief. Each page told a part of a story, one that didn't match the assumptions people had made the moment Robert walked through those doors. She picked up the phone and made a call. A few moments passed, then another call, and another. Each conversation grew more urgent, more precise. Her brow furrowed as she asked for parcel numbers, historical ownership records, and zoning data. Then she stood, cleared her throat, and addressed the waiting staff and management. "I verified it," she began, her voice tight with surprise. "Mr. Robert Lee Johnson is the legal owner of the land beneath this building. The title, the deeds, even the zoning confirmations, everything checks out. He's not only the landowner, but due to how the original development agreement was written, he holds leverage over the continued use of this property." A collective gasp rippled through the bank lobby. Those who had scoffed earlier now looked stunned, embarrassed even. And then Robert spoke. "I know this surprises you," he said, steady as ever, "but I've always believed in planting seeds, even if it takes decades to see them grow." His voice wasn't bitter. It was steady, grounded, like a man who had made peace with a long, uphill journey. "You see, back in the 1970s, I was fired from a machine plant job. Not because I was late, not because I did poor work, but because I spoke up when they paid me less than the white workers standing next to me." His eyes locked with the security guards, then the managers, then back to the staff still frozen in disbelief. "I filed a lawsuit. Took 3 years. I won. The payout wasn't much by today's standards, but I didn't spend it. I invested it. I started buying land. Not in the good neighborhoods. Those wouldn't sell to me. No, I bought where people said nothing would ever grow, where buildings sat boarded up and the city forgot the street names." He took a breath. "Late at night, I'd go to classes. Learned about property law, investment strategy, finance. The banks wouldn't lend to me, so I learned how to make the little I had work smarter." Over time, lot by lot, he had quietly built something, a small but powerful portfolio of properties. And this corner lot? He nodded toward the floor beneath their feet. "It was one of the first I bought. Paid $12,000 cash in 1973. Everyone told me I was crazy, that the land wasn't worth spit. But time had proven them wrong. As Atlanta grew, so did the value of his investment. And when Haven National Bank was constructed decades later, the land beneath it still bore Robert's name in the county records. And now, 50 years later, he had returned, not to boast, but to remind the world that legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly with a worn sack and a mountain of patience. The mood in the lobby shifted so fast it was almost tangible. The same bank employees who had laughed behind their desks now stood frozen in place, faces flushed, eyes downcast. The smug smiles were gone, replaced by tight-lipped silence. Even the assistant manager, who had earlier questioned Robert's sanity, now looked deeply embarrassed. His clipboard dangled forgotten by his side, and the security guard, the same one who had sized Robert up moments ago, took a step forward and quietly asked, "Sir, would you like me to carry your bag?" Robert looked at him for a moment, then gave a gentle shake of the head. "I appreciate that, but I've carried this for a long time." His voice was calm, not sharp or bitter. There was no need for revenge. The truth had already done what no anger ever could. He turned to the manager, who had now begun stammering a rushed apology. "Mr. Johnson, we didn't realize. I want to say I'm sorry for how we treated you." But Robert raised a hand, stopping him. "I didn't come for apologies," he said evenly. "And I didn't come to make anyone feel small. That's not how I was raised." The room quieted again. "I came here today for something bigger than me," he continued. "I came because I want to give back." There were murmurs, confused at first, then curious. Robert reached back into his sack and pulled out a single, pristine folder. Inside were typed documents, neatly prepared. He opened it slowly and looked around the room. "I've built a small fortune over the years," he said, quietly, carefully. "I never had a lot all at once, but I used what I had wisely. And now I want to use it for something that matters." He looked directly at the assistant manager. "I want to set up a scholarship fund." There was a pause. Then he added, "For young black entrepreneurs, for the kids who grow up hearing they don't belong in boardrooms, who are told they don't have the look or the background, the ones who don't have connections or trust funds, just dreams and grit." The room was silent. "I want the scholarship to be run through Haven National," he said. "I want the bank that once doubted me to be the bank that empowers others like me." A tear slipped quietly down the cheek of one young teller who had mocked him earlier. She wasn't the only one. A few employees blinked fast, trying to disguise their shame with professionalism. Robert gently placed a folder on the counter. "This," he said softly, "is what legacy looks like. Not what you keep, but what you leave behind." He didn't ask for a press release. He didn't demand headlines. He didn't even want his name carved in stone. He just wanted to open doors for others. And in that moment, the entire bank finally understood who Robert Lee Johnson truly was. Not just the owner of the land beneath their feet, but the architect of something far more powerful: hope. Within weeks of Robert's visit, everything changed. The bank's board of directors, initially hesitant, couldn't ignore the flood of attention the story was drawing. Local news picked it up, then national media. Within days, Robert Lee Johnson's name was trending across social platforms. Headlines hailed him as a silent giant, Atlanta's real banker, and even the man who owned the floor beneath their feet. Faced with the undeniable weight of his story, and the grace with which he had carried it, the bank responded not just with words, but with action. They launched the Robert L. Johnson Youth Business Initiative, seeded with a 5-figure donation from Robert himself. When the story went viral, the bank matched his gift, and soon, other donors joined in. Entrepreneurs, educators, and community leaders stepped forward, eager to be part of something that had started as a moment of mockery, but turned into a movement of empowerment. The initiative offered scholarships, mentorship programs, financial literacy workshops, and startup funding to underserved youth across Atlanta. Robert was involved every step of the way, not as a figurehead, but as a mentor. He insisted on meeting the students. He listened to their ideas, their fears, their dreams. Many said he was the first successful person who truly saw them, and his message to them was always the same: don't wait for a seat at the table. Build your own. What began as a surprising moment in a quiet bank lobby had transformed into a citywide symbol of resilience and vision. Back at Haven National, the atmosphere was different now. New staff were trained on Robert's story during orientation. Financial advisors used it as an example of long-term investing and legacy building. The same lobby where whispers of disbelief once echoed was now home to something else entirely. Mounted on the main wall was a bronze plaque, simple but striking. It read, "Vision requires no permission. Ergi." Beneath it was a photograph of Robert in his signature flat cap, standing in front of the very building he'd once been laughed out of, with a quiet smile and that old sack still hanging over his shoulder. And as for Robert, he didn't change much. He still walked the streets of Atlanta like he always had, calm, humble, unnoticed by most. The difference now was what he carried in his sack. Gone were the deeds and legal papers. In their place were handwritten letters, dozens of them. Some came from teenagers with rough starts and big dreams. Others were from young adults launching businesses with their first ever loan. One boy wrote, "Because of you, I didn't give up." Another said, "I want to be someone else's Mr. Johnson someday." Robert kept every letter, because for him, the greatest return on investment wasn't money. It was belief, planted like seeds in others, just like he'd once done for himself. And that, perhaps, is the truest kind of wealth.